Welcome. My name is Beth, and I'm here as a representative of Ambrose's Student Academic Success Team. Our last two live sessions have focused on the topics of first research and then academic integrity. Today, we're following up on these themes by talking about citation. We know by now that we need to do research to support our ideas, and we know that we need to acknowledge our sources so that we can uphold the highest ethical standards in our work. Citation is the way we do that. If you're joining us live today, I'd encourage you to sign in to your YouTube account and join us in the live chat. Please take a moment to introduce yourself. I'd love to hear your name, your program of study, and since we're talking about citation, which citation styles you're interested in learning about or which ones you've used so far. There are lots of different styles for citing our sources. By now, you might have heard of citation styles like MLA, APA, ASA, Chicago, CSE, and several others too. To start off today, I want us to think a little bit about why we cite. There are a good many reasons to cite your sources, and I'll bet you actually know most of them. Let's take a look at these three pictures. Each one demonstrates one of the main reasons for citing. Can you guess the reason? For number one, we've got a person in a mask climbing through a window. Not the masks we're wearing during COVID either. Number two shows people in business clothes shaking hands. And number three shows a rather chaotic desk. What do you think these pictures tell us about why we cite? You can share your answers with us in the live chat. Now, while you're thinking about the why and those three pictures that represent those reasons, let's talk about the what we cite. We already know that we need to cite whenever we're using information that we've found in a source, things that we might have found during our research. But there are three ways to use a source. There's quotation, paraphrase, and summary. And how we cite will depend on which way we're using our sources. So we need to be sure we understand the differences between these different ways of using a source. First, we need to think about what makes a quotation different from a paraphrase. Well, in a quotation, you're using somebody else's words. In a paraphrase, you're using your own words. So already, these two things are a little bit different. But they do have something crucial in common. Whether you're using your own words, like in a paraphrase, or somebody else's words, like in a quotation, either way, you're expressing someone else's ideas. You have a source that you're referring to. Now, summary adds on to that. Summary is similar to paraphrase in that you're using your own words to express somebody else's ideas. But in a summary, you're condensing the ideas. You're taking a big idea and explaining it in a shorter space. So, which of these three things, quotation, paraphrase, and summary, do we need to cite? Sometimes students get the impression that they only need to cite quotations because that's the only place where they're using someone else's words. However, we actually need to cite all three types of uses of our sources. In each case, we're using something that belongs to someone else's words, and perhaps someone else's ideas, and we need to give credit for both. We do need to distinguish between them, however. For paraphrase and summary, we just need to show that the ideas are someone else's. We can do that by adding a footnote or a parenthetical citation, as we'll discuss later. With quotation, we need to show that the ideas and the words are someone else's. To do that, we need to add a footnote or a parenthetical citation, just like with a paraphrase. But we also need something to show that the exact words we're using belong to someone else. Now, normally we'd use quotation marks to show that we're using somebody else's words. And that's good, but what if it's a really long quotation? Then it's easy to lose track of where the quotation begins and ends, even with the quotation marks. So we actually need different formats for short quotations versus long quotations. For short quotations, as we discussed, we can just use quotation marks. For most basic quotations, unless you have a specific reason to do otherwise, you can just use regular double quotation marks. Sometimes people use single quotation marks just for a different style. Generally, for most academic purposes, you're going to use double quotation marks. There are some specialized uses of single quotation marks, but standard quotations are double quotation marks. For long quotations, so that's for short quotations, for long quotations, quotation marks actually aren't necessary. There's another way to indicate that you're using somebody else's words. Instead, you start your quotation on a new line, and then you indent the whole quotation so that it's inset from the left margin of your page. Not the right margin, don't worry about that, just the left margin. And that formatting shows that you're using someone else's words. It's an alternative to the quotation marks. This format is called block quotation format because it turns the quotation into a block of text that is visually distinct from the rest of what you're writing. So let's recap a little bit. If you're quoting, you're using both the words and ideas of another person. To show that the ideas belong to someone else, you need a footnote or a parenthetical citation. To show that the words belong to someone else, you need quotation marks or block quotation format if it's a long quotation. If you're paraphrasing or summarizing, you don't need to use quotation marks or block quotation format, but you still need a footnote or a parenthetical citation to show that the ideas come from someone else. Each citation style has different guidelines for when you use a short quotation versus a long quotation, so you just have to check your citation style, but that's the general idea. Now that we've thought a little bit about what we cite, let's return back to our opening question. Why do we cite? Now, if you're joining us, I see Adrian's joined us in the chat. If you're joining us, please take a moment to introduce yourself. Let's return to that opening question, why we cite, and the three images. We'll look at them again, and I want you to think about what they tell us about why we cite. Let's look at image 1. Here, we've clearly got a thief taking something that belongs to someone else. When we don't cite properly, we're actually doing the same thing. We're taking someone else's stuff, that person's words and ideas, and acting as if those words and ideas are ours. Citation is a way to avoid that kind of ethical problem. It shows that we're fairly acknowledging the work of others, not just taking it for our own. Now, how about image 2? Image 2 is a little bit abstract, but it reminds us that citation is about trust between people. In this case, between you and your reader. When we cite, we're showing our readers that we're trustworthy and that we know what we're talking about. We show that we're credible, that we're the kind of people you'd want to make an agreement with, you want to shake hands over something with. And then we've got image 3. Here, the image of the messy desk should actually remind us of what we don't want our writing to look like. Ideally, when we write, we want to make our readers interested enough in our topic that they want to learn more. If we don't cite, it's going to be really, really hard for our readers, and even for us, to follow up on our ideas. Good writers leave a clear trail of evidence, showing where they got all of their information. That way, if someone asks you a question, you know how to follow up with more information. You can just say, oh, I found that here. And your readers can follow up too. So these are the three reasons, or three of the reasons, why we should pay careful attention to our citations. And these three reasons should help us feel more motivated to cite our sources well. Now, we've talked a bit now about what we should cite and why we should cite it. But now let's talk a little bit about the how. The first thing you might have noticed about citation is that each discipline has a different style for citing its sources. I've listed several of the most common styles here, and let's go through them for a moment. MLA is often used in literary studies. Chicago is common in music, in history, and in biblical studies and theology. And you might see Chicago also called Turabian. Chicago and Turabian are two different versions of the same citation style. Chicago is for scholars publishing books, and Turabian is for students writing papers. But often we refer to them both under the same name, or under each interchangeably. Whether you're calling it Chicago or Turabian, this style also has two forms. There's the notes bibliography form and the author date form. Notes bibliography is far more common, both in in general and at Ambrose. But if your professor hasn't specified, you should probably check. APA and ASA are fairly similar, and they're both used in the social sciences. For the sciences, there are many different styles, and usually you have to use a different one for each journal or each discipline that you're involved in. Two common ones are ACS, the Association of, or the American Chemical Society, and CSE, the Council of Science Editors. Now, why do you suppose that different disciplines ask you to use different styles? Is it just because they're fussy, or lazy, or sadistic? All disciplines need to support their ideas with evidence, and the evidence that they use in different citations or in different disciplines is dramatically different. Each discipline conducts research in different ways. Citation styles in the arts and the humanities tend to emphasize page numbers. Why? Because in these disciplines, the research often centers around texts, maybe a literary work like a poem or a story, maybe a biblical text, maybe a historical document, maybe a musical work. So page numbers are really important. The social sciences and the sciences don't emphasize pages very much, and instead they emphasize dates. That's because in the sciences and social sciences, the discipline tends to change quite a bit over time, and the more recent something is, the more likely it is to be accurate. And so it can be really helpful for individuals to know when they're reading your work when the study was published. The different disciplines also have different styles of doing their research. So in the humanities, there are often single researchers who are doing their work very independently from one another. In the sciences and social sciences, the researchers tend to work together a lot in lab groups. Now, the sciences and social sciences also tend to work a lot with quantitative data, with numbers and figures, so they have tables and graphs and abbreviations to think about. So their citation styles tend to emphasize those things. So different disciplines do research in different ways with different needs. And so each citation style reflects the needs of the discipline, the different types of evidence that are used in the discipline. A style from the sciences isn't going to help a literary scholar cite the line of the poem that that scholar is working with. And a style from the arts and the humanities isn't going to give scientists the detail they need to do graphs and figures and tables and numbers. So, as challenging as it is to navigate, we actually need all of the different citation styles. Now, although all of these styles are unique and suited to their specific disciplines, all of them actually have a few things in common. All of them have rules about title pages and page numbers and all of those things, but there's also a more fundamental commonality. All of the most common styles, at the basic level, they have two main building blocks. They have in-text citations and then a final list of sources. The in-text citations can take the form of notes, which can be footnotes or endnotes. The endnotes are the ones that appear at the end of the whole work, at the very end of the paper. Footnotes appear at the bottom of the page. Footnotes are far more common. So that's one form of in-text citation. The other form is a parenthetical citation, where the information is in parentheses at the end of the sentence. So that's the first element, the in-text citation, something in the sentence itself that shows where the information came from. The other element is the list of sources at the end of the paper. It can be called by different names. Sometimes it's called the references page, the bibliography, or the work cited. So we've got those two elements, the in-text citations, and then at the end of the paper, the list of sources. Why do we need both? Well, we need the references page because we don't want all the information for a source in the main text. When you're reading about a source, you don't need to know where it's found. It's too distracting. So we need the references page to hold that information. Also, let's say I've finished reading the paper and I want to look up some of the sources that the paper used. I don't want to have to page through the whole article to find those sources. I want to be able to just see them all at once. So we need the references page for sure. We also need the in-text citations to be able to specify in the text which ideas are ours and which ideas have come from somewhere else. The references alone, that list of sources at the end, won't tell us that. We need the in-text citations to signal, oh, this idea belongs to this person and this idea is from that person. And that helps us to maintain our good, strong ethical standards. Now, every citation style is different, but we can make some general observations about these two building blocks, the list of sources and the in-text citations. We'll start with the list of sources, the thing at the end. Here, one of the things you should be thinking about is what do you include in that list? If your list of sources is called a works cited or a references, those titles mean that those are things that you've actually used in your paper. So you should only include sources that you've actually used. A bibliography is slightly more loose. Some professors are okay if you list works that you maybe looked at but didn't actually use. Most professors, though, will probably prefer that you only cite the sources that you actually used. Be sure to check if it says bibliography. If it says works cited or references, if that's what it's called in your discipline, then in that case, you should be using just the works that you've actually cited, actually used in your paper. In terms of the other thing you should be aware of with your list of sources is the order that you list them in. And this can be a common error for students as they're getting to know how to cite. In terms of order, there are two different ways that you can go. You can go in alphabetical order, or you can go in sequential order. In alphabetical order, you organize by the letter of the first thing in the entry, which is usually the author's last name. For sequential order, you organize in order of the times that you've listed that source in the paper. I listed this source, or I used this source first, this source second, this source third, and so on. It is far more common, and each citation style will have rules about which you can use, whether it's alphabetical or sequential. Alphabetical is far more common. Almost every citation style asks you to list your sources in alphabetical order. So just be aware, when you're organizing your sources, it's likely going to need to be in alphabetical order. It's a good thing to check for. In terms of formatting, there are kind of some norms around formatting your sources on that list of sources page. First of all, always start on a fresh page at the end of your paper. Don't just start it, if you end halfway down the page, don't just start your list of references right away. Start it on a new page. Generally, the title, whether it's works cited or references or bibliography, generally you'll center that at the top of the page. And typically, the list of sources will be double spaced, and every entry will be double spaced as well. If your discipline asks you to single space entries, then at least there will be a blank line in between entries. Another thing that's distinctive about the list of sources is hanging indentation. Hanging indentation, in that case you have the first line of the entry starts right against the left margin, and then the second, third, any subsequent lines are indented. And there are ways to do that hanging indentation using tools in your word processor. But that's a standard feature of the list of references or list of sources page, because it makes it easier for someone to skim through what you've written and quickly find a source. Another thing to note is that there are standards. If you use multiple sources by the same author, the first time you list the author's full name, and then the second, third, and fourth times, and so on, you replace the author's name with 3 hyphens followed by a period. So those are some general guidelines for the list of sources in most citation styles. There are also some general guidelines we can use to help us with our in-text citations. As we've discussed, there are two different formats for in-text citations. There are parenthetical citations in parentheses at the end of the sentence, and then there are notes, footnotes typically, endnotes occasionally. Most citation styles use one or the other, parenthetical citations or footnotes, not both. MLA, APA, and ASA all use parenthetical citations. Chicago Notes Bibliography, the most common version of Chicago, uses footnotes. Some of the scientific citation styles allow you to use either. You have to choose one and stick with it, but they do allow for either. You have to be careful, though, that you're following their format carefully. For parenthetical citations, like in APA, ASA, and MLA, you typically include some key ingredients. Typically, you're going to include the author's name, the year of publication, and the location in the source or page number. If there isn't an author, you usually use a shortened form of the title. For notes, when you're doing footnotes, you generally provide the full bibliographical information for the source the first time around. Then, after that first time you've used that source, then every other time you cite that source, you use a shortened footnote that has just enough information to tell your reader kind of where to find that and find more. In-text citations, whether they are footnotes or whether they are parentheses, usually go at the end of the sentence. There are some exceptions to this rule, but generally they go at the end of the sentence because it's less disruptive for your reader. If the footnote or if the in-text citation, the parenthetical citation is in the middle of the sentence, kind of makes the reading experience more choppy for your reader. So generally put them at the end of your sentence. Now, remember, the purpose of all these citations is to help us follow the trail of information. To find a particular source, your reader will need certain kinds of information about it, some basic bibliographic details. For example, your reader will probably need the author's name and the title of the work. But depending on the type of source you're working with, you might also need some other information. For a book, you'll need the author and title for sure, but you'll also need the publisher, who published it. That's in case there's multiple works with the same author and title or different versions of it. If it is an online book, an ebook, you might also need to provide information about where you found it. So which service did you find it through? And also the date of access. So that's for a basic type of book, but there are different kinds of books, and it'll depend a little bit on the type of the book that you're working with. First of all, there's things that are like scholarly monographs. And the phrase scholarly monograph means that it is written monograph. Mono means single, graph means writing. It's written by one person. So here's an example of a scholarly monograph. It's written by Smero Camberelli, one author. With this, if you read the whole book, you can cite the whole book. But if you only read one chapter of the book, just cite that one chapter. In that case, you'll need to cite the name of the specific chapter you're working with, as well as the title of the whole thing. You'll also want to include the page numbers of the specific chapter that you're working with. So scholarly monographs, generally if you're going to end up just reading one chapter or a couple of chapters. Cite the stuff that you actually read so that you're clear about where your source was specifically. You may also run into things called edited collections. These are kinds of books that are edited by one or a couple of editors, but each chapter is written by a different author. In this case, you're going to need to provide the author and title of each chapter and the page numbers of the chapter that you read, as well as the information for the whole book. The title, the editors, the publication information of the whole book. So there's a smaller thing that you're citing within the bigger thing. You need to provide the information for both. You might also run into a translated book, and in that case you would need to include information about the translator. Sometimes you'll also, different kind of a book can be an encyclopedia or a dictionary entry. Most dictionaries and encyclopedias, each article is written by somebody different. Sometimes those are anonymous, but if there is an author provided, you do need to indicate the author and the name of the specific entry that you used. If there is not an author that's named, then instead of listing it by the author's name, you actually use the title of the entry. There are also things called journal articles. You may have already heard this phrase used a fair bit. A journal is a type of a periodical, and a periodical is something that's published periodically. It's published regularly. Many of them 2-4 times a year. So this is an example of a journal, of a periodical, something that's published regularly. You'll notice that it has the same title every time. It's not just a single book, it's a collection. It's something that's published regularly. So what this is basically there's an editorial panel that selects, people submit articles to this journal, and then the editorial panel decides what gets published and then periodically publishes that in the journal. So this will have different information to cite it because there's different issues of the journal. So you'll need information about the journal, the name of the journal, the volume number and the issue number. So how do I find this particular edition, this versus this one? You'll also need information about the specific article in the book. You'll need the title of the article, the author's name, the page numbers, these kinds of things. Also, if the journal is online, very few journals are actually printed now. Most of them are available online. If you found it online, you will also need to provide some information about where you found it. Another common thing that you might cite is a website. With a website, one of the key questions you should ask is, am I citing the whole website, or am I just citing one page on a larger website? For example, the Ambrose website. If you're citing the whole website, you'd be citing potentially hundreds of pages. More likely, you're citing a particular page on the Ambrose website. So think that through. Again, there's kind of a bigger work and a smaller work. Are you citing the smaller work or the whole thing? If you're citing the whole thing, you'd provide the basic information for the whole web page or website. If you're citing a particular page, you'll need the title of that page, as well as the title of the site, the organization, the date published, and the date that you accessed it. Because the websites change rapidly, and so you want to indicate the date that you accessed the material. Now, for each of these different types of sources, your citation style will have specific rules about how to format your source. When you're doing your research then, pay careful attention to what kind of source you're working with, and to the specific bibliographical details you'll need to cite it. Then, if you're aware of what kind of source you're working with, and if you have all the information you need to cite it, then it's just a matter of plugging that information into the kind of formula that your citation style has provided. Now, there are a number of really great resources out there that can help you with citation. For one thing, the Ambrose Writing Center has several quick guides for different styles that can kind of give you an introduction to the citation style and how it's used here on campus. For that kind of information, you can visit the Writing Center website. So you go to the Writing Center website and then click on Resources on the right-hand side, and then on Citation Styles. You'll see a list of all the major citation styles used here on campus and tips for how to approach them. Now, another way to get help with this is to book an appointment with the Writing Center for help with details. If you're not quite sure how to navigate it all, we'd be happy to help you with that. If you need more detailed information, you can also check out some resources that are available in the library, including a writing handbook like the Concise Canadian Writer's Handbook. This can be a great resource. It has a whole section on citation and some of the major styles of citation. You can also check out the specific style guide for your discipline. Every discipline publishes their own style guide that has all of the details about how to cite things in that discipline. Most times, a handbook or the quick guides on the Writing Center page will be enough to get you going, but if you ever find yourself dealing with a more complicated source and need more information, the handbook of the discipline is a really great help. So those are additional resources that you can turn to. You can also count on citation software to help you. Citation software is designed to help you harvest the bibliographical information from a source and then turn that into a citation. So for example, let's say you find a source on one of the databases in the Ambrose library, and then when you find that source and you've got your citation software ready to go, you should be able to just click a button and your citation software will import all of the bibliographical details from that source into an archive and hang on to that. And it'll kind of preserve that as kind of a list of sources for you. And you can even organize them. Then, when you want to actually cite that source, you can click on another button and have it output a citation in the format that you'd like. There are a number of free options for citation software. Some of the ones that you might want to check out are Mendeley, Zotero, and EndNote Basic. Now, these citation tools will get you close to an accurate citation, but they can't manage all of the details for you. Sometimes they won't catch all the nuances of the different types of sources, or they won't catch all the formatting details like italics, periods, bold, all of the different formatting details. So you will, if you do choose to use citation software, you will want to double check the output with your own eyes, with your own brain, to make sure that it's accurate. But it can be a helpful tool to get you started. Now, we are coming to the end of our time together, so I do want to give you a chance to ask questions or to share your comments. So if you're joining us live, please go ahead and type your thoughts or questions in the live chat. While you're typing, I just want to let you know about other ways to learn more. We do have a number of workshops on research skills and citation at Ambrose, and these sessions will equip you with the skills you need to do your research well and to give credit to your sources. One of our upcoming sessions will teach you a little bit more about how to paraphrase, quote, and summarize effectively. So we would encourage you to take advantage of those sessions. You can find out more information about all of those at ambrose.edu/workshops. Now, I'm just checking first questions. I'm not seeing any questions in our live chat right now. If you do have questions, we'd very much encourage you to email us at studentsuccess@ambrose.edu. As I said, you can also check out the Writing Center or talk to folks in the library who are also very helpful with citation. We'd also encourage you, as I said, to check out some of our other workshops and to work towards earning your Lions Pride bonus for the year, which gives you an opportunity to earn swag and earn coffee as well. Now, thank you so much for being here today, and we'll see you next time.